Hey guys, welcome to Thrive Bites Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Colin Zhu, and thank you so much for listening on. You could have been anywhere in the world and you decided to spend just a few moments of your precious time, and we greatly appreciate it. Here on the podcast, we talk about three things: living a plant-powered lifestyle, enhancing emotional resilience, and creating a thriving mindset. And I interview a range of passionate guests such as physicians, dietitians, coaches, entrepreneurs, and many more. And please join me as I deliver these engaging, informative, and high-valued conversations for you. And just remember, the first 5 seasons of the Thrive Bites podcast can now be found in the new TheChefDoc app, available in your Apple Store and Google Play stores. So what are you waiting for? Come on inside. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Thrive Bites Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Colin Zhu, and this upcoming episode is amazing. I get to sit down with the founder of First Seed Foods, and we talk everything homestyle Indian cooking. What was it like growing up in terms of food? What is the food landscape now in terms of ethnic cooking? Why is health an issue? And we get to go deep into her beginning stages of this entrepreneurial journey. So you don't want to miss it. It's going to be great. So I'll see you guys inside. Okay, guys. Well, welcome to another episode of Thrive Bites Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Colin Zhu, and thank you so much for being here with us. You could have been anywhere in the world, and you decided to spend your precious moments with us today. And I am greatly appreciative of that. So today we have a wonderful guest. I am super thrilled because I love the food that she is putting out there into the world, and I cannot wait to learn more about it. Her name is Arti Mala, and she is the founder of First Seed Foods, a company that makes vegan, oil-free food and ships it frozen nationwide. She started this company back in 2022. And now offers 7 home-style Indian foods, 5 of which can be ordered in a salt-free / SOS-free version. And she is in Washington, D.C. with her family. And we are going to learn so much more about her story. So without further ado, please welcome Arti. Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, thank you. The pleasure is all mine. And we were just chatting off camera about how we kind of, it's one of those stories where, the 6 degrees of separation, right? Like we know of someone that knows of someone, right? And we have a mutual friend. So you are calling from DC. How is everything going on that side of the world during this first quarter of the new year?
Gosh, it is first. The time is flying by and we are surviving kind of frosty but chaotic weather. So we've already had our first big snowstorm, but then it was out 70 degrees the other day, record highs, back to frost this morning. So surviving, but very excited for, of course, an incredible new year.
Awesome. And I'm happy to hear that. And I was saying to you, I was like, spoken like a true entrepreneur, right? Because we're in February at the time of this recording, and we're like, where does the time fly to?
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so I came upon your company through a mutual colleague, and I was very impressed by everything that you're putting out there. And I just wanted to learn much more. So to kind of orient our audience to everything, can you please share the origin story? Every superheroine has a origin story, and we know you have a beautiful company. So tell me how this all came about. What were the magical moments that brought you to this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share it. And I think it's, it'll hopefully sound familiar to a lot of folks because I think it's essentially a story of like wanting to live a healthier lifestyle and make healthier food accessible for myself and my family, coupled with this idea of just wanting more fulfillment in my day-to-day job. So I think the two of those were, I would say, like the overarching themes that led to building this company, which is still pretty new, as you shared, 2022. We're at the start of 24, so we're almost exactly 2 years old, but haven't actually been in market selling food for really that long. It's maybe just been a year and a half. So, the pandemic hit. turned everyone's world upside down. At the time that the world shut down, I had a toddler and a newborn. So, and I was working a job that just required a lot of hours and a lot of focus. So I was going crazy with having 2 kids home and working full time. Same with my husband. Those first 6 months took a massive toll on us. We were ordering takeout every day. And we were just, every day was just survival mode, just trying to make it to the next day. And, by the end of 2020, we just didn't feel great. We didn't feel great. And, just realizing more and more how scary some of these underlying conditions are, we said like, hey, we need to do something about this. We need to find a better way to take care of ourselves. And of course, went down the rabbit hole of like, how do we eat better? How do we, incorporate more movement into our lives, things of that sort. And of course, ran into plant-based eating. The cool thing though, this time around, because I've seen forks over knives before and I'd been kind of exposed to some of this before, was this kind of idea of reducing the amount of refined ingredients in our food, and specifically oil, which I don't think I had really run into the last time I kind of went down this path of exploring plant-based. So intrigued by it, but also a little confused because a lot of the foods that we eat at home, Indian food has always been our staple. We eat it most days of the week, have always been prepared with oils. So there was this kind of inflection point of like, okay, like we understand the data, we understand why, but then how do we make it real for ourselves? I mean, I don't know if you found this yourself too. And I know you said you enjoyed Indian food so much, but that's always been the kind of friction point is like, well, how do we do whole food plant-based well, but then also stay true to some of the foods that we grew up with?
It's interesting because I grew up with a lot of Indian families, and it's interesting because they never invited me over to for cooking. I've always went to weddings and parties and things like that, but I never actually really immersed myself in terms of, man, what are these ingredients? What is it cooked with? How is it prepared? It wasn't until I actually went to India myself for a wedding, and that's probably like, I don't know if it's like overwhelm mode when you're going to a beautiful country like that. And then on top of that, a wedding. It was one of my childhood friends. And I remembered that just so many styles, so many complexities. One of my favorite chef instructors back in school, he's actually an Italian guy, and he went to an ashram in India. And that's how he fell in love with Indian cooking. And so his specialization is actually Indian cooking. But I found it very interesting how I think, and you can probably correct me if I'm wrong, how a third of India is vegetarian. And still the number one cause of death is still heart disease. And so I had to break it down to myself. I was like, is it the oils? Is it the ghee? Is it that everything is fried? Every time I go into an Indian market, there's a whole, probably 2 aisles full of just snacks. And so, I just never really, I couldn't really figure that out. I think it has a contribution. So I'm curious to know, what was it about the rabbit hole that you uncovered for yourself?
It's such a good point around how rich the food can be, even though, a lot of it is made using vegetables and legumes and things of that sort. But my best guess is that the added levels of oil and dairy have definitely been really challenging, I think, for folks. And I think there are like documentaries in the works about this, some that have come out. So more and more data, I think, will be helpful for folks. But what's the Indian food I grew up eating at home is so different from what you find in a restaurant in the States. And for sure, what you find out as like street food in India or restaurants in India as well. Restaurant food in general, I think regardless of cuisine, it tends to be much, much more indulgent. And unfortunately, for a lot of folks, unless you have the luxury of, having these foods prepared at home and kind of seeing a version of that, that's your only reference point. And so I was sharing about like the pandemic and us ordering a lot of takeout and so on, even fast casual, even if you're not dining in a restaurant, even some of what we think of as like healthier alternatives for a takeaway are, even if you pick the plant-based option, or sometimes can be very sneakily not that healthy if you really take a closer look at the ingredients. So it's been kind of an interesting learning journey for me, which continues to be a learning journey for me. But what I found so compelling in some of that rabbit hole that I went through was this idea that you can prepare these foods without the dairy, without the oil. And by the way, like you don't have to compromise on the flavor. And that's the part that was, just kind of was a little bit of a question mark. So we experiment, my husband and I were intrigued by this. We experimented a ton at home. The base that the spices are usually tempered in, called a tarka, is something that's typically made using oil or ghee. So we started experimenting just using water or, in some cases, dry roasting the spices, things of that sort. So different techniques. And we landed in the same place that like, oh my gosh, there isn't a major flavor difference. So how wonderful that you can still enjoy these foods and not compromise on kind of the user experience or the flavor profile. And we cooked this way at home for about a full year before I decided to do something more with it in the form of building this company.
That's awesome. What was can you share a snapshot of what was cooking like growing up in your household? Like what kind of foods? Because you said that is very different from what is displayed out there in the restaurant takeaway delivery world.
Yeah, for us, and I think this varies so much for different families in the South Asian, or South Asian origin. For my family, because we vegetarian food, so one, we didn't really cook any meat at home. Whereas I know that what I find stereotyped is like the loved food of India is like a chicken tikka masala. Like that wasn't a thing that I grew up with, which I think a lot of people associate Indian food with. The other bit is that we eat a lot of lentils. Like at home, there's so many varieties of lentils that, I think even in my own cupboard, I must have like 10 different varieties of lentils that we just rotate between all the time. And while lentils, I think, are sometimes served in an Indian restaurant, there's like one or two that are popular. And there's the same one or two that we're making available at First Eat as like a starter, just very simple food. So usually cooked lentils, usually a vegetable with it, a whole wheat roti, also not doused in, in any kind of oil or anything, some rice. Like they were simple but flavorful meals. And that's what I've always associated with Indian food. Now, when we've gone out to a restaurant as a family, like, we've of course like ordered the indulgent meals and so on, as well, the things that you don't make at home. But growing up anyway, we didn't eat out a lot. And I think that's also another big cultural shift in general, is that more and more families dine out, whether fast casual or kind of sit down. And I don't know if I'm like aging myself by saying this, but we just didn't eat out all that much. So it was very occasional, some of the foods that are a little bit richer.
Yeah, I think it's due to how time passes in terms of globalization, in terms of trends that kind of happen. Maybe over time, there's higher disposable income. Maybe there's, an increase of a two-income household that allows for, why don't I call this outsourcing. Anything that's prepared outside of the household is what I call outsourcing your food, right? And so we've noticed this trend, at least in America, where because of, for example, that one income earner to two income earner household, and then also that technology, that automation that happened, at least in the Western world. And that created, that decreased the price of TV dinners, packaged foods, frozen foods, and all that. And so that also allowed that other shift of eating out as well. It's funny you mentioned the chicken tikka masala. That's like our equivalent of like beef and broccoli and General Tso's chicken and things like that. And I'm like, we don't eat that at home at all. So, and so it's funny how certain ethnic foods are associated with these things, and yet this is not, really a thing. And what's interesting is that you talked about different varieties of lentils. How is that? That must be, did you grow up in America or you came over, or how was it growing up?
Yeah, mix and match. So I was born in the States, actually not that far from where I live today, but I did live in India for a few years. And I went to school there. I lived with my grandparents who are also vegetarian. And so I've had a mixed experience both growing up there and here. More of my latter kind of upbringing, college and so on, was certainly in the States. But in both environments, we honestly didn't eat out a lot. We enjoyed a lot of our meals at home. They were mostly prepared at home. And I think some of that both thoughtful, fresh cooking, I guess, emphasis on, or I guess more thoughtfulness just around what we're eating in what variety and how to
Mhm.
incorporate different flavors and so on was always like a big thing for either place.
Yeah, because lentils and beans, legumes, lentils, peas, things like that, that is fully utilized in the Indian style cuisine. And I'm just very curious because in America, that it's almost non-existent, right? Because 97% of Americans are deficient in fiber, and that's a
Mhm.
huge contribution. And so that probably was very shocking to the system, at least, to be able to not see this variety or even non-existent for Americans. So, I mean, what has been your take on that, and how does your food, I guess, switches this up for people?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I was sheltered from a lot of how you can say like the quote unquote like typical American family eats because one, we ate at home a lot, so we were doing fewer restaurant trips, and two, like I had always brought lunch to school. Kind of was aware what was out there, but I think in some part because I'd grown up vegetarian, there wasn't necessarily a feeling of deprivation or craving or anything related to what was typically served in schools, colleges, and otherwise, or that my friends were eating. Definitely surprising, of course, just the difference in what's considered a typical meal in a South Asian family or, in India versus over here. Yeah, what I'm finding though is it's a really interesting shift is that there's more and more awareness of and appreciation for international flavors.
Mhm.
And even as I'm starting this company and serving this very diverse demographic of customers, it's been so interesting to serve folks who haven't necessarily experienced Indian food that much outside of maybe, a local trip or two to their local restaurant, but helping them kind of easing the way to do that with simpler, lighter meals and just kind of a variety of flavors. Some of our foods aren't really found in a restaurant. The kidney beans, for example, which has become a surprising favorite. It's like a cult favorite in India, but even amongst there's no comparable dish at most restaurants. It's just kind of a little bit more, has not been commercialized, I guess, but it's been really
Mhm.
fun to be able to introduce that to customers
Mm.
here.
Can you, for someone that isn't as well versed in terms of Indian style cooking, can you be able to share the differences in terms of North versus South in terms of the foods that are prepared? Is there a huge distinct, I guess, difference? And where does your inspiration draw from? Is it more from the North or the South, or is it a blend of both?
Yeah, I'm so afraid of answering this question because I feel like I will get surely I will say something wrong about how things are prepared. It's such a
All the
diverse
aunties are going to be like beating down
all
your door.
exactly. I'm gonna get phone calls from all the aunties. It is such a diverse country with so many different subcultures and it's extends beyond food. I mean, language, even cultures,
Mhm.
traditions, things of all of that sort. They vary so much depending on where in the country you go. One fun fact related to the food is that, one of our foods or the most popular is the chana masala. And I find that depending on where in India you're from, you either love it or you hate it.
Mm.
It's the favorite for so many customers, but depending on, what part of the country, it's possible that your family prepares this to be sweeter. It's possible that your family prepares this to be a little bit more dry or, spicy or whatever else. So it's, even that kind of base ingredient can be done so many different ways. My family is from New Delhi, and I guess that classifies like it's the style of food is probably closer to North Indian food or Punjabi food is probably the closest approximation, and that's I would say the flavor profile that it first eat, I guess, the foods that we do today lend itself to. Now, that being said, I have some incredible customers that reach out to me all the time, say, like, have you thought about a South Indian style sambar? And by the way, I have an incredible recipe when you're ready. And that's amazing, by the way, because we don't want to lose, the rich authenticity of the food and kind of what we're putting
True.
out there. So there are so many different ways to do it. So my sense is that more of expansion will rely on incredible collaborations with folks
Mhm.
and help add some magic to the flavors.
Hey guys, what's going on? This is Dr. Colin Zhu, and thank you so much for hopping on to this week's episode. Guys, it's 2024. What is your intention for this year? Who do you want to become, and how do you want to feel? Some of the things that you might be, looking to do is to lose weight. Some of you guys want to get out of your family history and genetics and not play victim to your medical and health destiny. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's very, very important to kind of look at some facts and figures. For weight loss, 71% of Americans are overweight and 40% are considered and classified as obese. And these numbers are continuously rising. A lot of these are associated with a lot of medical issues, arthritis, gallstone issues, heart disease, cholesterol, diabetes, cancer, and the list goes on. And also having and carrying extra weight increases your risk for COVID. Also, in terms of chronic disease, 60% of Americans carry one chronic disease, 40% two or more. Whenever I get a patient, it's usually a laundry list of medications that they are taking at the same time. Guys, if you are looking for a different and alternative solution, I've created a solution for you guys, and that's in the form of group coaching. If you want to be coached by us, Dr. Zhu, and our team members, me and my team, I've set up a beautiful 12-week, 3-month program that's going to be led by your own respective group coach, also led by me teaching you expert classes, and we teach you on what to eat, how to shop, what recipes to go for, where to navigate the supermarket, your pantry, your kitchen, and learning all about sustainable strategies on losing weight and preventing chronic disease. So if you want to learn more, click on the link below, and we would love to set up a breakthrough call with you guys to see if we are a mutual fit. And I want to be able to cheerlead and advocate you guys and be a support for your wellness journey. So click on the link, schedule a call. We'll see you guys on the next one, and enjoy the rest of this episode. I think that's very key, especially if you're doing something as innovative as you are doing right now, is where do you take it? Where do you take it to in terms of the next level? How do you continue to evolve it, right? And this nicely segues into the next question I have is, when you were preparing this idea and this concept, what is, would you say, quote unquote, wrong with what is prepared out there now? And how has that been the inspiration for you to kind of flip it on its head in terms of how to prepare it differently?
I don't know if I can use the word wrong necessarily, because, I think that there is the thing that I was trying to solve for in building this company was that there is a way that we try to serve our family food, in that it is primarily whole food, plant-based. We try to use very few refined ingredients. We try to use primarily organic ingredients, but of course we don't want to lose the flavor. And those are the simple principles that kind of matter to my husband and I. And we found that it was almost impossible to find that. And like not in the grocery store, not at a restaurant, not via the local auntie. So, those were, which is also an option. A lot of stuff.
They're like, without oil and ghee, this is blasphemy. Yeah.
That, or even organic ingredients are really, really hard to find, right? You can kind of sometimes outsource the cooking if you need to, and you can order, ask a local chef to help. But then there's a question mark on the ingredients. So all of the things that we were looking for, we realized, like, even if for the days that I'm seeking convenience, I cannot buy this elsewhere, my only option is to cook, which is totally fine. And we've done that, and we continue to do that. But gosh, like, there must be a way. There must be some way for the days that you're in a pinch where you don't really feel like you need to make a compromise on your health just to be able to eat the way that you want to eat. And I think those are the things that I felt were missing, and that there was an opportunity to solve for. And that's kind of what led to trying to build this company.
Yeah, I love it. That leads me to my other question, is that has there been other similar companies set up the way, when you were on kind of like building the blueprint of this concept, have there been any other competitors in the landscape that you could have compare and contrast yourself to? And then if not, what was your, I guess, steps in terms of, okay, if we're going to scale, how we're going to scale. Do I start from my own kitchen? Do I leverage other people's kitchens? Can you talk about, the early stages of how you were building this?
Yeah, absolutely. So your first question around competitive landscape, it's really interesting. It's kind of an evolving one. I think that as a whole, if I look at emerging consumer product companies or meal kit companies, I think a lot of folks are trying to solve for something similar, which is how do we make more nutritious food available, provide folks with that convenience without compromise. And I think there's so much innovation happening in that space. I think it's especially cool that there's so much happening within like the ethnic food space. A lot of people are reimagining the foods that they grew up with. Maybe it's to offer fresher ingredients or to offer more protein and so on. So there's a lot there that I'm excited about. And, it's such a hard space, food, margins are tough and customer acquisition is tough. And there's so many different things that it's a little bit of a question mark of like who survives, like how many of us are still around in the next 5 to 10 years. I hope all of us, but that's the part that to keep an eye on. But I love how much innovation is happening in the space.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of actually physically getting started, a lot of this for me was about being very scrappy and lean, and actually continues to be. So in 2022, February of 2022 is when I put in my resignation. March 1st is when we legally established the company. It took me about 6 months of just pure homework to get off the ground, which is like, what kind of products do we want to offer? How do we nail down these recipes and kind of test them out? What should our packaging look like? Signing the first 6-month lease on our shared commercial kitchen. So for our first several thousand units was me going into kitchen, cooking, packing, physically shipping out every order. And the idea for the first year was to say like, hey, like we think there's this white space. Like we think that there is an opportunity to offer these foods. But the question is like, one, do people want this? Are they willing to pay for this? And two, do they like it enough that they would buy it again? Like those are the early signals that I was trying to get a read on. And so by the end of 2022, we had done a 4-month pilot and we got really promising reads from that. We said, oh, actually, like folks really enjoy this. Here's a few things that we can do differently. But like we're ready now to take that next step, which is work with the manufacturer, work with the logistics company who can help us expand our shipping radius and kind of build us in a bigger way, which is very much still a work in progress. But every day we kind of chip away at trying to grow this little company.
That's awesome. And I'm guessing this is a dual husband and wife company.
I wish that was the case, but unfortunately we do need to pay our mortgage. So my
someone has to keep an eye on the kids.
Yeah. So my husband holds down the fort with his day job. I will say he did take a week off of work. In the early days, I needed help in the kitchen, but he went out, got his food safety certification. He took a week off. He came and helped me in the kitchen. It was amazing. He takes very good directions, thankfully. But yeah, it's, right now it's very much a solo mission with a lot of support from, I would say, just kind of my network in general and like incredible customers who so many will send me thoughtful multi-page emails about here are all the things you should be doing for marketing. They're so invested and want to see the company grow. And then just like incredible partners, our manufacturer, our logistics company. I mean, they're some of just the most wonderful humans that are so supportive of this company growing. So from a like core ops, it is still a 1-person company. So it is as small as it gets. But I like to think we have a really big and incredible community moving it forward.
I would say up until 22, similar when you first started, the TheChefDoc has been around 7 years now. And it was actually 21. It was always been a one-man operation. And thankfully, it's kind of expanded as well. So I totally understand and can appreciate and resonate with that. Yes, we would want the support and help and that delegation, but it's also super, super important to do it strategically and to do it in a very stepwise fashion. I really love the fact that you're super hands-on with it, your family's super hands-on with it, and you've been receiving a lot of love and great feedback from the customers. And I can only wish you guys massive, success moving forward. If I were to give you a magic wand, and say, Arti, what will the future look like in 3 to 5 years? What would you like to see, change? Not just in terms of your products being everywhere, for example, but what would you like to see change in terms of the dynamic of homestyle Indian cooking? Or maybe that becomes a segue for other types of homestyle ethnic cooking for something else. Like, what would you like to see in like 3 to 5 years?
Gosh, that is such a good question that deserves probably deeper thought than the answer I'll have to offer right now. But I think I think more accessibility to more options is going to be key for folks. And, I think First Seed aims to be a part of that solution, but I think we'll always be one very small part of a much, much bigger solution. So for example, it's absolutely possible that the price point of our products is out of reach. And so our thought was, well, like, hey, if the mission is to help folks eat healthier and enjoy Indian food, maybe that involves posting our recipes. So we posted a lot of the recipes of the foods that we sell. And that is, I think, uncommon for a lot of food companies, but something that is 100% aligned with the mission. If I can serve that same customer with a recipe, wonderful. Like, I think that feels just as great. And so, I think that there are different parts of the solution that I think First Seed will help with, but I think that there's so much opportunity for just the conversation for food, around food in general, homestyle Indian or otherwise, to change. And I think some of that comes with access in different places. So in restaurants, for example, which is sometimes an entry point for many people, how do we make better options available for folks such that they have choice? And right now, maybe folks don't have that choice, even in grocery stores. So that magic wand is probably a broad wand of how do we make more information available so folks have better information to make better decisions for themselves and their families, whatever that might be. And then how do we then make it easier for them to then implement those decisions in their everyday lives?
Awesome. I love that. I love that answer because it's really, yes, increasing the number of options and variety and that diversity available for someone to choose, because I think that's why the vegan/plant-based movement is exponentiated over time, especially over the pandemic, especially with the transition meats and all that. You can have your own opinion about it. However, it does introduce another option, right? And I think when you have more options, then you say to yourself, okay, then I can do a little bit of a step in the right direction. And then hopefully that becomes another step, down the line where I can say to myself, oh, I've gained the confidence and the certainty that, you know what, I can do this myself.
100%.
Because here on the show, we always say, your health starts in the kitchen because you know what goes into your ingredients. You're very passionate about, making this type of food, not just accessible, but introducing or reintroducing a different way of looking at it, but also how that influences and affects our health. And so, yeah, I think, yes, being part of that solution is a wonderful, wonderful way of just kind of giving back.
Yeah. And it's the information piece is such a big one for me because I think about my own journey, and running into all of this was, again, me going down the rabbit hole to say, like, how do I better take care of myself? And it was the informational bits that were impactful for me. And whether it's listening to this podcast or running into a cooking blog or whatever else, like, those are those very important little nuggets that I think help. And I think it's going to take a lot of little nudges for a lot of folks to make these like really big, profound changes in their lives.
Yeah. And that actually segues very nicely to my last question before we close out is for someone that didn't grow up in an Indian, household, and you talked about in the beginning of the conversation about health, right? What would you say for someone that didn't grow up in this household? How can we talk about health, right? I don't know if it's openly talked about in an Indian family. How do we talk about health? How do we nudge? How do we kind of, seep it in, whether it's through food, whether it's through just being open and just saying, you know what, this is a hard conversation to have, but let's talk about it. It's kind of like estate planning, no one wants to talk about it, right? And but it's a necessary conversation to have, because we're kind of like in this sandwich generation, right?
Yes.
You have to care for your elderly parents, and then you have a family to take care of, right? Hard, uncomfortable conversations. So what would you say, having gone through this process, what would be a couple of tips you would share for people that are listening in terms of how do we talk about our health?
Gosh, that's a really hard one. And I
In the
imagine,
context of the Indian family, right?
yeah, yeah, it is really tough. I'd say even in my own experiences talking to different relatives, especially some of our older relatives, that, you know, for a lot of these folks, things like organic food or plant-based food, this is just the new fad of the day. And, their thought is that, well, we've enjoyed certain foods this way our entire lives, and I don't see what I don't see why I should change the way that I'm
Yeah.
eating, which is like typically the argument. And I think the two things that I've kind of brought up in those kind of uncomfortable conversations is, one, the nature of our food has changed so much. So
Mm.
even from the time that our parents were kids to now, now I have little kids, like in those generations and in that time, the food industry has changed in really, really significant ways. And just the level of trust maybe that we have in our food supply system, I think we just have to do a little bit more due diligence on our part. Like there's more responsibility on the part of the consumer. So that's one thing, that's one area to like start talking about. And some of it starts with reading ingredients. Some of it talks about thinking about the origins of things. I mean, like
Mm.
the animal agriculture, for example, is like really, really hard topic to talk about with anyone, especially someone who is not plant-based. So, that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is, unfortunately, because we are seeing these skyrocketing rates of heart disease and diabetes and things of that sort, cancer,
Mhm.
it does become a conversation piece, is that, hey, there is a link between how we live our lives, whether it's nutrition, whether it's stress or sleep or movement, and all of those bits, and kind of how we're like the health outcomes that we're seeing today. And like we've got to talk about the bridge between those two things. So those those are the also heavy topics, but ways at least spark some conversation such that you don't feel shut out immediately. Completely agree with you in that these are just hard conversations to have
Mhm.
sometimes at home.
Mhm. Mhm. And same here in terms of the Chinese culture, especially from my parents' generation. They've been eating the same exact foods. And I think you nailed it on its head in terms of the food industry has changed so much. Agricultural, the fact that nutrition is just depleted from our lands because of how modern agriculture has become and evolved over time. And then just seeing these rates of chronic disease, me being on the front lines and being able to see this and just appalled, it's hard to translate that. It does take a level of education and awareness. And in terms of finesse, in terms of communication, to me, it's always about finessing. How can you convey something where it's non judgmental? It's important to talk about. It is uncomfortable, but it's a very necessary
Mhm.
conversation to have.
Yep. Oh my
So
gosh, couldn't agree more.
that's the challenges. And
Yeah.
Arti,
Agreed.
thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation. I think you're doing big things in the world. How does someone find your company? How do they order? Can you share how that process works?
Sure, absolutely happy to. So, name of the company is First Seed Foods, and that's the URL, firstseedfoods.com. One thing that's a little bit unique about us is that we only ship once a month. So, when we initially started, this was just purely out of like simplicity of operations. We would do like a monthly sales drop for a couple of days, usually sell out or just close the drop, and then we would ship out the following week. Now we just keep the order window open a little bit longer. But for example, this month, our close date is this Friday, and then everything ships and delivers the week after. So we still only ship once a month, but you're welcome to go onto our site. We have a new customer box, which is like just a good variety of everything, both regular with salt and then an SOS-free version, which I know is becoming more and more important to folks. Or you can mix and match without any kind of an upcharge. And then one thing that I'm very proud of that is that you don't have to subscribe. Like you don't need to commit to a subscription, which I know a lot of food companies and meal kit companies kind of require. You're absolutely welcome to order once and either like have it as a stash in your freezer to use when you need it, or decide whether, it's just like a good addition to your life and the added convenience helps. We're there to help more than anything else. And if, again, it's not accessible because we don't ship in your area, or I will share a lot of our recipes. I mean, the mission is still to help folks eat healthier and to make Indian food a little bit more accessible. So just happy to connect with folks in any way that makes sense for them.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. Well, we'll definitely put all the links into the show notes when this airs. And I really appreciate you. Massive, massive success. You've had amazing, amazing traction so far. And yeah, just keep doing all the great work that you're doing, especially when we just love food in general here on the show. And if we can make food that's good for you, even better. So we really appreciate you coming on today.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. Thank you so much for having me on. Incredible work that you're doing. And I'm so excited to share more of this with the world.
Guys, thank you so much for watching another episode. If you enjoyed this, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you feel that this was a benefit for someone else, please let them know. And until the next time, please say goodbye to Arti. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoy that episode. If you like that, please like, comment, and subscribe. And please follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, and anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. And if you felt that this was a benefit for someone else, please let them know. And also remember that the first 5 seasons, 150 episodes, now can be seen and heard on our new TheChefDoc app. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating, and we greatly appreciate it. And we'll see you on the next one.